Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today, we're discussing the latest version of the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Yacht-Master 40. This is the reference 126622, platinum bezel, stainless steel case. This is the watch as it was launched as part of a new generation of Yacht-Masters in 2019. So it is the latest revision. 40 millimeters in diameter and 904L steel. The watch is 11.6 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 47.3 millimeters, including solid end links to the bracelet, 49.9 millimeters across the wrist, with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. We'll throw the watch on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, and it wears beautifully, being thin enough to fit underneath any cuff, but also fairly constrained across the wrist. At under 50 millimeters end link to end link, this is one of the shorter Rolex sports watches. This will fit well on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters in my experience. While that's normally a shave when you have a watch that's close to 50 millimeters across the wrist, the particular shape of this one mitigates against fit issues. Don't ask for specifics. This is just a matter of experience. I've seen women wearing them and they look really good. Now, of course, the watch includes an Oyster bracelet. Rolex makes its own cases, clasps, and bracelets. It has its own foundry. It makes its own alloys. So it makes its own platinum. It pours its own platinum, creates its own bezels from blanks, and it uses 904L steel, which is a high nickel content steel that is more resistant to corrosion, particularly in the presence of salt. Think sweat, think sea salt. You don't need to rinse it afterwards. Now, the watch has a little conforming end link that better mates the bracelet to the case without a gap. There is a pronounced taper from the end link down to the clasp. You can see polished center, satin shoulders, polished outer faces, removable links fixed in place by screws. You've got quite a few of them to fine-tune the fit, but you have other options too. Inside, we have the Rolex 5mm Easy Link tool-free adjustment system. It snaps in, it snaps out. It's great for fine sizing. And then if you look internally, you can see that there are 3 pairs of divots inside the clasp, and you can use your strap tool to dismount the spring bar and change the anchoring point of the bracelet and the clasp to fine-tune the fit. Single swing arm clasp, but thick gauge steel. You can see externally there's polishing, there's satination. We have a lift lock system with a beak and a hook. That's the first locking factor. See how that works right there? It's spring loaded. See how the beak unlatches, so you don't just pull this thing open. It's not friction fit. It has 2 distinct locking mechanisms. There's a kerf underneath the 5-point coronet, so you can get your nail in there, pop it open. This is no Submariner. In fact, this is a lot more like a Daytona in case form than it is like the GMTs or the subs or the Sea Dwellers. You can see it's a beautifully tapered fluid form. There's no satination, but nor is there a squared off end, nor is there a sheer flank. This has a rounded profile when viewed in any position. You could see that there is a pronounced rounding off to the lugs when viewed in profile. When viewed end on, you can see the curve of the case. It's graceful. Again, more like a Daytona, a Datejust, or a Day-Date. And of course, back in 1992 with the first Yacht-Master, the idea initially was conceived as an ultra-luxe Submariner that would replace the traditional Submariner. Well, Rolex eventually realized it couldn't do that to the sub that had utilitarian roots, didn't want to ruin a classic. So it launched a parallel model called the Yacht-Master that would incorporate a lot of those upscale refinements to make it a little bit more genteel while keeping the sub in rotation. We have a screw down crown here. You can see that it is a trip lock crown, and the trip lock, of course, endowing the watch with 100-meter water resistance. I think that's underrated. I think because of the presence of a trip lock rather than a twin lock, I think it's actually more than 100, but officially it's 100. We have a bidirectional rotating bezel that is used ostensibly as a regatta timer, which is why it turns in both directions. It's not a dive watch. It's not life-saving gear. That's the idea there. But you can time an event up to 60 minutes using the bezel. And as with a dive watch, I prefer this kind of timer to a chronograph. Easier to use, easier to read, reads up to 60 minutes. Most chronograph minute registers are only 30 or 45. Plus, you don't have the downstream maintenance expenses that come with a chronograph. Taking a quick look, you can see we're in the era of Rolex Chromolite Blue. It's bright, it's blue, and all 3 hands so you know even in the dark that your watch is running. Hands as well as indices are made of white gold to resist tarnish or oxidation over time, and we have a lovely and lustrous bright blue metallic sunburst dial, Cyclops eye magnifier for the date, and the watch does have two well-known setting modes. One of them is the quick set system for the date, and the other when you pull the crown out all the way, hacking or stop seconds, so you can stop that red varnished seconds hand, generally at the index at 60, and set the watch to a reference time. If you're ever wondering, am I looking at the 126 or the 116 version of the watch? Take a look down at 6 o'clock. You got that little crown between Swiss and Made. And actually, if you look very carefully here, I've got good light today, you can see the little laser engraved crown that sits inside of the crystal itself, one of Rolex's many anti-counterfeiting features. Underneath the solid case back, we have the latest Rolex automatic caliber 323 bi-directional automatic winding. 3235 is different from the 3135 because it has a longer power reserve, 70 hours, a chronergy ligaformed escapement that's Rolex's answer to the Omega coaxial with a more traditional Swiss lever arrangement. Also here we have a rotor bearing, a ball bearing system on the winding rotor rather than the old 3135's jeweled staff. So this is a more shock resistant rotor. It energizes a bigger power reserve at 70 hours. We got the quick set, the hacking seconds, 4 beat per second rate, 31 pivot joules. We have an anti-magnetic niobium zirconium blue oxidized Breguet overcoil hairspring. Makes the watch highly resistant to magnetism, probably mil-Gauss, if we're honest. And then it's an overcoil shaped by hand so that the watch keeps consistent time in any position. The better to pass the COSC chronometer test, which the bare movement does, but Rolex then cases up the certified movement in a watch and tests it in 6 positions to run no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per 24 hours. That is the basis for this term superlative chronometer in the modern era. We also have a rugged architecture for the balance. It is a free-sprung balance with a dual anchored balance bridge that is anchored on both sides of the balance wheel for better shock tolerance, and via Rolex's micro-stella adjustment bolts, it is also capable of being very precisely regulated. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.